Salvage, Chapter 38, The Best Policy. Date point, 3 years 1 week after Vancouver. CH Trading Lane, Kelsey Alliance Space. The hunt was going well. Brood Davis had infiltrated the heavily trafficked area of the region belonging to the prey calling themselves the Kelsey Alliance, moving between their major trading routes to attack the few small vessels that currently frequented them. Extreme pirate activity was apparently the cause for the reduced numbers, but the brood had neither seen any pirates, nor did Alpha Davis mind. Too many of the prey moving through the same area could create a problem, and all hunters knew that it was easiest to hunt the stragglers. But today they had lain their trap, a warp spike set up on the CH trading lane. It was a lane that saw many vessels, and frequently even military ships, and the prospect of taking the prey from where they had their claws was exciting. The vessel that they had seized was large, a heavy freighter full of goods and more importantly full of prey to hunt and to save for later. Yes, the hunt was going very well.
Hunger. Command. Boarding groups ready. Docking action complete in 3, 2, 1. Hunt well.
Alpha Davis had chosen from amongst its least skilled brood members. This was a large but easy target, and it was important that they gained the practice where they were able. Without a strong brood, there could be no hunting of truly impressive prey. Without a strong brood, they might fall prey to the humans in defiance of the natural order of things. There was absolutely no way that Alpha Davis would let that happen. This prey, however, would not take long to hunt. Alpha Davis knew from its own experience how long the hunt should go on for vessels of each type. The only factor here that could delay them would be the possibility of more intelligent prey to hide in the cargo. Although they would always inevitably be found, and the warp spike caught something else, disrupting its warp field and dropping it into local space. Alpha Davis scanned it, although even on the initial sensors, it had been far too small to contain much of anything. The more detailed scan showed it was a small cylindrical object, packed full of technology. It was green in color, but had some kind of biped painted on it.
Surprise. Query. A probe?
Why would anyone be sending a probe through such well-charted space was an extreme curiosity to Alpha Davis, and the only reason it could imagine was if it belonged to an as-yet unknown species making its first attempts at mapping the area. That excited Alpha Davis, to discover a new species, and to be the first to taste its meat. That was truly a golden opportunity. Then the probe released several smaller objects that set a trajectory for the Davis brood ship. Smaller objects, like those that had brought ruin to the swarm as they had chased the cursed human, and the Davis brood ship was immobilized from having docked with the heavy freighter.
Panic. Order. All brood members brace for impact.
The Davis brood ship shuddered violently as the objects impacted and blasted holes in it. Automated systems took over and sealed the compromised compartments, preserving what atmosphere they could, and keeping the ship from becoming an airless tomb. Alpha Davis exhaled. It had survived, and despite damage to its ship, it remained functional. They could continue their hunt, and deal with the damage once they had moved to a better location, and Alpha Davis would take the combat probe back to the homeworld for analysis. Everything would still proceed in the natural way of things. That was when the pirate cruiser dropped out of warp. Hodgepodge, pirate cruiser, CH Trading Lane, Kelsey Alliance Space. "We've just confirmed that the monkey barrel is dead ahead," announced the sensor tech. "It looks like it only just started to give the hunters a bad day." Jen didn't remember his name. This was Cheer's crew, not hers, and she thanked him by his rank.
"Nicely done, sensor technician. What's the hunter vessel's condition right now, then?"
"Heavy damage to outer hull on a single vector," the sensor tech replied. "Extensive atmosphere lost to adjacent sections, but vessel still functional. It's currently locked with the heavy freighter." Jen leaned forward in her seat.
"Right. What's the likely number of hunters on a ship that size?"
"No more than 50, Miss Jen," the weapons tech advised her. "They look to be readying their coil guns to engage when we enter effective range."
"Well, take them out with a couple of the rockets then," Jen told him. "We don't need to be getting holes in our fancy new cruiser, do we?"
They'd only just recently managed to acquire the Kelsey cruiser, and had stolen it from a repair dock while it was under a skeleton crew. Pirate crews had worked on getting it back into working order back in Cimbrian orbit, and Tricor had added some of the enhancements she and Jen had been discussing. This was its maiden voyage, as well as the first deployment of the monkey barrel device, a warp-capable probe intended to trigger warp spike traps laid by hunters and fire its salvo of small rockets at any vessel emitting an unregistered hunter transponder code. By sending it ahead of the hodgepodge on an identical warp vector, it would cause significant damage to the unfortunate hunter vessel only a few moments before the hodgepodge itself could arrive and take advantage of the situation. Today it had worked perfectly. "As you say," the weapons tech replied. "Locked on and released." Jen waited. They all waited for confirmation of impact, and they were not disappointed. "Hunter vessel's weapon systems are destroyed," the weapon tech relayed. "We are free to proceed with boarding action." Jen had to hand it to the crew. They'd come a long way since she'd started recruiting in earnest, and after several sorties with the hunters and small military vessels, they were no longer afraid of boarding action. Of course, it helped that they had one more trick up their sleeve.
"Get us docked then,"
said Jen, giving the order.
"Second airlock on the large freighter. We don't want her making a run for it when the hunters are busy with us. Don't forget we're sending in the hellhounds on this one, into the hunter ship only."
Kavaris, Kortai Directorate Core World. The Koro Kavan Corporation was currently experiencing what Adrian had laughingly called a hostile takeover. Right now, this included less of a financial repositioning and more along the lines of everything being on fire and everybody running in screaming terror. It was admittedly a lot more exciting this way. But Adrian didn't think he was going to get out of this without smelling like burned hair for a couple of weeks. He really enjoyed using the plasma thrower, of course. But the only ones really experiencing the nasty end of it, besides the Koro Kavan headquarters itself, of course, were the robo-slugs who had made a point of shooting at him. That hadn't been these robo-slugs, of course, since those ugly fuckers had been thrown into the sun, along with their asshole of a boss. But they were hard to tell apart and were all pretty disgusting creatures. They wore mechanized armor, that was true, but it was built to resist kinetic pulse weaponry, however, not plasma. Convention held that nobody sane would use plasma in a firefight, and from the awful stench of Adrian's slightly burned hair, they were probably right. Asket was following him via a small hover camera that served as his physical presence on what was essentially a battlefield. "You know, if you were just going to destroy the computer core, I don't know why you needed me to come along in any capacity." Adrian grinned wickedly into the camera. "I needed you to use it to spread evidence to remote terminals. And besides, somebody else has to see me being this fucking awesome, don't they? You're recording it, right?" "It's good to see you're enjoying yourself," Asket replied, with a tone that more than suggested that he didn't find it particularly good at all. "But this stunt has drawn public attention. The police will be swarming your position very shortly. At least they will once they clear the fire and wreckage." Adrian sighed, taking a moment to survey the devastation that he had caused. The building was well and truly on fire. It had been made an example of, and while the public may never become aware of what had caused it, the same could not be said for the top end of town. If they thought they could fight back in the shadows, striking at each other's forces while remaining above it all, they were sadly mistaken. The Koro Kavan Corporation had been dealt a blow it may never recover from. Today, its leadership group had died, its building had burned, and its records were being systematically destroyed by the virus Asket had loaded into it. This would undoubtedly raise the stakes in the game, but that just meant some players would fold. "I hope that means there'll be a while, because I don't really want to shoot out with the fucking cops," Adrian said. "What's the fastest way out of here?" "I've had Godugan standing by since you started your rampage of arson and slaughter," Asket replied testily. "Get to the rooftop." "Yeah," Adrian drawled uncomfortably. "My problem with that plan is that the elevator has been destroyed and the upper floors are on fire. And thanks to all this hair, I'm really fucking flammable." "That's unfortunate," Asket replied. "Godugan doesn't want to try getting lower towards street level either, in case she attracts police attention. So there's really only one other option." Adrian had a feeling he wasn't going to like the other option. "I've got to tell you, my plan B's usually fucking suck. What's the other option?" "How do you feel about sewers?" "Not fucking great," Adrian replied. "If I'm gonna have to wade through shit, I prefer my chances with the fucking cops." "Wading? Sometimes I think I've finally understood the depths of the awfulness of your planet, Adrian," Asket said in undisguised disgust. "And yet you always manage to surprise me." Despite Asket's attitude problem, his outburst was a good sign. You didn't normally think about it, but any day you didn't spend knee-deep in alien turds wasn't as bad as it might get. No waiting, then?
Sewers contain pipelines for fecal matter, but they are mainly access shafts for power, water, and other services, Askett told him. I'm directing the camera to guide you to the building's access point. Try to keep up.
That was no effort, of course. Under gravity, the hovercams had a top speed equivalent to a slow jog, and that gave Adrian plenty of time to make sure that he wasn't being followed by the police, or by anything else. Nothing managed to approach him, however, so he figured everyone else in the building must be either dead or trying to get the fuck out of it.
Well, fuck me. What are the cops doing?
Adrian asked as he reached the access door, built into the wall of the second sublevel where he hadn't yet spread too much destruction. He would have thought that critical infrastructure, such as the corporate servers, would be located in an easily defensible location such as this, but it didn't seem like aliens thought along those lines.
They're not going to be on my ass while I go underground, are they?
They're a bit distracted by the fire and the terrified crowds, Askett replied dryly. They won't be going in without assistance from the fire department. You should be able to get out clean.
Good enough, Adrian thought, and forced open the access door. He had half expected the stench of rancid sewage, but the air was clean and cool. The worst that could be said for the place was that the spaces were cramped for a being of his size, having clearly been designed to provide comfortable space for Cortai technicians, and nobody else. There was a good side to that, too, of course, because while Cortai police could follow freely, the same could not be said of the robo-slugs.
I'm going to direct you to a street-level access point some distance away, Askett told him. You'll have to acquire a street cab to get back to base. The fire services have dispatched aerial fire suppressors, and Gudugin has had to pull away.
That was good, Adrian thought. There was no way that the building would be structurally sound after the damage he'd done to it. But if they managed to contain the fire, it meant that nobody who didn't need to get involved would get involved. There wasn't any reason that Adrian needed to step further into the realm of corporate terrorism than he already had.
You'll be glad to know that it's already all over the news, Askett told him. There must be 50 surveillance drones in the air to record what's happening to the building.
What are they saying happened?
Adrian asked. There was no helping the fact that it had clearly been an attack, but they'd done their best to obscure any information that could link it to a blue hairy biped. The security system had been part of the central computer, and that was a pile of molten slag. They didn't have any off-site location getting the same information, and Askett had been surprised at the very suggestion that this might be done.
There are lots of conflicting reports, Askett replied. Everybody was confused by the distractions you detonated in the parking lot. Some are already making the connection to your distraction at Iridis Industries, however, and the fact that Jakal did his sun dive so recently is not being overlooked.
So what does that boil down to?
Adrian asked. Despite having now lived amongst aliens for years, he had still remained in somewhat willful ignorance of their news and entertainment networks. He had always found that he had enough shit around him he didn't understand, without needing to tip the news from the galaxy in with the rest of it.
It means they're posting that some violent faction has emerged who has it in for corporations, Askett told him, which was basically what we wanted. Nothing is coming through about any blue-haired biped, but I'm seeing a fair bit about a weapon that shot fire and the laughing maniac who was shooting it.
They were all paying attention to the gun?
Adrian asked, a little surprised but not exactly displeased. It wasn't unusual for humans to focus on useless things when they were put in a high-stress situation, and it sometimes took considerable training to learn how to pay attention to the right things. That they'd entirely ignored the blue-haired beast who was holding the gun in favor of the gun itself was unusual.
It is a terrifying weapon, Askett replied, so that is not surprising. News networks are predicting the end of Korokavan as a major corporation as a result of this attack. They seem to be suggesting that an attack of this nature must mean that Korokavan is involved in some very shady things.
They're not wrong,
Adrian said, satisfaction of a job well done bringing half of a smile to his face.
When should we move ahead with the rest of the plan?
My access to Iridis Industries servers has allowed me to upload a number of secret documents that can be leaked at any time, Askett replied. I just have to send a tip to the news networks, and they'll do the rest.
What do you think the public will make of a secret war between corporations turning into a public scene like this?
Adrian asked, now that the plan was fully underway. They had discussed it beforehand, of course, but that had just been speculation on how the news networks would run with the story. Now that they were actually reporting it, Adrian and his team would need to be careful to time their next move for maximum effect.
I think it will proceed as discussed, Askett replied. Kortai are predictable due to our practical natures, so it is likely that the Directorate will need to respond with a crackdown on corporate freedoms, and they'll need to respond right away.
And what about Herbert?
Adrian asked. He was still reliant upon the Kortai counselor to have him turned back into his normal human self, and didn't relish the idea of spending the rest of his life with blue hair and getting full-body waxings. They'd informed the counselor about their plan this time, even if they had left out the general details. Herberter had been terse, but had agreed to the action so long as he wasn't implicated. The counselor is already on the news denouncing the attack, Askett replied, saying that violence in our streets cannot be tolerated, no matter who was behind it.
So in other words, he's all for it, Adrian assessed. Or at least he's happy to get the leverage. There's no way that any sane corporations will want to get this kind of treatment, and he already looks like the good guy when the corporations get the blame pinned on them.
Your ability to comprehend the counselor's plans really scares the shit out of me, Adrian, Askett replied. Did I ever tell you that I'm glad I'm on your side?
I kind of figured you might be, mate,
Adrian said, grinning from ear to ear as he finally emerged back onto street level into an alleyway.
I kind of figured you might be.
Cosmic Delight, Heavy Freighter, Saketh Trading Lane, Kelsey Alliance Space. Hunters did not enjoy being set on fire. That was a cathartic discovery, if not a surprising one, and Jen had ordered Tricor to put a few things together to exploit this particular weakness. The result had been small, purpose-built remote-controlled tanks that spewed clouds of plasma like the modified plasma-based heavy cutters had aboard the Zottersill. These were much smaller, of course, and couldn't blanket such a large amount of space in superheated matter. But for boarding actions, they were horrifically effective. Combining them with Hunter Scramblers, the devices used to interface with their communications, had been the masterstroke that made each tank capable of taking on several hunters simultaneously. The downside was that the place always stank badly of burned meat when they did board them, and the stench was nearly impossible to completely get rid of. They had been named the Hellhounds by Jen thanks to their plasma-spewing abilities, and then painted red, in the same way she had named the barrel-shaped probe the Monkey Barrel, and had painted it green, reminders of home, as well as the amusement of an in-joke that she alone was privy to. The hunters had been dealt with excessive force, the only way to deal with them effectively, and now the crew dragged their corpses to a free airlock to be jettisoned into space, while Jen herself sat down with the shipmaster of the Ardeen Corda, the largest freighter vessel they'd encountered on this particular run, to go over what was expected of him. He was a Vizcatic, and that was not a species normally found within the Alliance, especially in positions of authority. The Vizcatic domain was part of the Dominion, after all, and all Vizcatic, to her knowledge, with the exception of pirates, were part of the domain. "Your name?" she asked him, knowing already that she would be unable to pronounce it. "Jukviktiker," he answered obediently. He was scared, but not as scared as he had been of the hunters, and Jen had made no secret of who she was. Word had spread far enough now that everybody knew you could live if you were robbed by the Zottersill, so long as you cooperated, even if you went away in financial ruin. "I'm going to call you Jack," Jen told him flatly. "You already know what we're going to demand." "You're going to take my ship, aren't you?" Jack asked, although it wasn't really a question. "I'm going to take your ship," Jen confirmed. "I'm also going to take the hunter ship. Your crew and yourself will be disembarked in local space near an outpost world, provisioned with more than enough medical gear and food to aid you on your short journey." "Please, Pirate Queen," Jack said, surprising her. It was rare for anyone to identify her personally, and even rarer for anyone to say anything with any kind of respect approaching what she had just been given. "Please, the ship is my home. It is my family's home. We have suffered enough losses today. I beg that you do not take my ship as well." "What is your cargo?" Jen asked, continuing with her normal questioning. This wasn't the first sob story she'd heard, and it wouldn't be the last, but if she was to start making concessions, they'd soon lose their fear of her and the Zottersill in general. That wasn't something she could afford. "Please, Pirate Queen," Jack whined, clearly willing to debase himself before her with pathetic complaining. "Listen to me," Jen said sharply, not about to spend her time on this. Her temper had remarkably shortened in the last few months, as had her patience. "We have just given you your lives. Without us, you and your family would be feeding the hunters, and yet here you are with your surviving crew getting medical attention instead." Jack's eyes were downcast at her admonishment,
and his whole body seemed to sag dejectedly. It was bizarre to see a blue giraffe sag dejectedly, and strangely hilarious, but Jen managed to keep her amusement under control.
"Your cargo?" she repeated.
"We're transporting high-tech medical gear to a Class 8 world," Jack told her. 8 fabricators, and the assembly kit intended for the colonial lathe. Jen sighed. Despite being a pirate, she had the reputation to maintain for not being a completely heartless bitch. If there were medical supplies intended for a colony, they'd undoubtedly need them. But she didn't need to be so generous as to give them all of them, and although Jack was a Vizcatic and therefore utterly hopeless at deception, she wasn't about to accept the details of the cargo sight unseen.
"Provided you are telling the truth, we'll be taking half of the medical gear, 6 of the fabricators, and the assembly kit," she told Jack. "You can keep your ship, but we'll be going over it for any useful parts you don't require to remain functional."
Jack was almost too stunned for words. Thank you, Pirate Queen," he blurted out once he'd found his tongue.
"It's the people on that colony you should be thanking,"
Jen told him, although she was aware that the story of her generosity would get around soon enough. It was a practical decision more than a generous one, however. Doing this sort of thing cultivated a level of goodwill amongst the Kelsey worlds that other pirates had never achieved, in spite of the fact that she was still robbing them.
"I won't steal medicine for those who need it. Not all of it, anyway."
"You are too generous, Pirate Queen," Jack informed her. She'd smiled knowingly.
"Thank you, Shipmaster," she said. "I know."
Date point, 3 years, 2 weeks after Vancouver. Cimbrian. That brings us to 17 Hunter vessels, Cheer reported. With the new components we just brought in, we'll be able to expand the machining center and get the damaged ones fixed ahead of schedule. Tricror will be pleased.
"Make sure we keep the cloaking project as our main focus," Jen said. "More ships for a fight is fine, but if we can avoid that fight altogether, it'd be far better for us all. With the monkey barrel and the hellhounds in play, we should be able to increase the number of vessels we can harvest."
Her communicator link lit up and beeped. Priority call from the tech station.
"Excuse me, Chair,"
she said, frowning as she took the call. Anything from the tech station was usually going to be important or bad news, or both.
"This is Jen,"
she said as it connected. "This is Lead Tech Hargett," the other side replied, and Jen seemed to remember the name belonging to one of Cheer's Gowans, who had joined on during their time at Erbzerk. "We've detected an inbound vessel, very small and fast. It looks like it's ready to run, but it's hailing us."
"And?"
Jen asked, knowing they wouldn't have contacted her if that was all there was. "It's obeyed orders to come to a full stop," Hargett continued, "and asked for you. We followed your orders on maintaining secrecy over the presence of yourself, being human. But they requested a message be delivered." That was strange, and Jen had the feeling this was going to become one of those bad news notifications.
"What message?"
"A question," Hargett relayed. "What's the crack?" Jen paused. That was a saying she hadn't heard someone else say in a long time. Not since she'd left Earth. She'd once said it to Adrian, and he'd proceeded to look for the structural fault he thought she was referring to until she realized she'd needed to correct him. It was a saying native to Northern Ireland, roughly equating to, "How are things?" or "What's happening?" and not the sort of thing that you'd easily find out in space or being directed as a secret message to anyone if you didn't know a lot about who they were.
"Escort them in."
"As you say," Hargett replied. "I'll direct them to landing zone 4. The link disconnected, and Jen shifted her attention to a confused-looking Cheer. "What's the crack?" he asked.
"Something fucking crazy, Cheer,"
Jen replied, thinking over the possibilities, all of which excited her, and all of which worried her.
"I think we're about to have some interesting visitors. Make sure they're escorted to my office."
"Escorted?" Cheer asked meaningfully.
"Use a hellhound on remote control," Jen told him, "but the escorts are to be unarmed. Make sure our guests are aware that this is built to handle everything."
"I'll personally involve myself in this one if you don't mind," Cheer said. "I don't want anybody else in charge of that thing in case they get nervous."
"I was going to ask you to do that anyway," Jen replied. "Get 2 others to do the actual escorting, but I want that hellhound present at all times."
"If it needs to fire, it will cause casualties amongst our own, possibly you included," Cheer reminded her with concern. Jen nodded.
"I know that, and so do you. But they don't, and those things look damned menacing, they do. Get them to my office and I'll take care of the rest."
Dara Houston, just turned 20, until recently under the impression he was the only one from Mother Ireland to have been introduced to the cosmic community, and currently very uncomfortable in the presence of a very attractive red-headed Irish girl who appeared to have some kind of dangerous space weapon pointed at his man parts. Come to think of it, he wasn't sure whether it was the gun or the girl who looked more dangerous, but right now he was willing to put them on a par and work it out better later on, presuming, in fact, that he experienced a later on. There was still the killer robot in the room, after all. So from the way things were looking right now, it wasn't looking good.
"So," he said conversationally, "that's an interesting deadly robot you've got there. One of the Gowans told me it was your idea." "We're not here to talk about me," the Irish girl he assumed to be Jennifer Delaney replied. "We're here to talk about you. I've got all day, so don't bother holding back." "Do you think we could do without the gun?" he asked. "I'm harmless, really. What sort of gun is that, anyway? I've not seen anything like it out here." "It shoots a small metal bolt at high speed using kinetic technology," Jennifer Delaney informed him flatly. "This one includes a powerful electric shock intended to subdue a target."
That was an impressive-sounding device that Dara would have preferred pointed anywhere else. He knew she was attempting to intimidate him. Of course she would, since this was apparently her impressive operation, and he'd come unannounced and possibly unwanted. But knowing that it was an intimidation tactic certainly did not stop it from working.
"But again," Jennifer Delaney said, "we're here to talk about you."
Well, Dara replied, fumbling for words. It always seemed so easy to talk about yourself when you didn't have a lightning harpoon pointing at your genitals.
"What's to say? My name is Dara Houston. I'm originally from Lorry. I was abducted from a beach in Ballygally after my girlfriend broke up with me when I was 16. And after I escaped from my captors, I found stevedoring on Ogham. Oh, and I just turned 20.
"Happy birthday," Jennifer Delaney said dryly.
"That doesn't explain why you're here."
Well, Dara replied, starting to sweat. This was easily the most difficult interview he'd had in his life, although he'd really only had a few when he was trying to get a part-time job in the fast food industry, so he could drum up some extra dosh.
"I got picked up by this white giraffe guy named Kirk. Well, that's what we were all calling him anyway, and..."
"What you were all calling him?" Jennifer Delaney interrupted him sharply. That was a little rude, but at least she'd taken an interest in something besides pointing that destroyer of manhood at him.
"He was going around gathering humans, you see," Dara quickly said. "He was trying to get some of us home. The ones of us who wanted to, anyway. Most did because most didn't want those fucking hunters crawling up their asses."
Her gaze seemed to harden in a worrying manner.
"I must have been overlooked, I suppose," she said, and he could have sworn that for a moment he had heard a tremble in her voice.
The gun did not tremble, though. He had to give her credit on that.
Well," Dara replied, lost for what to say. "I'm sure he didn't mean to. There was a long list of people and this was dangerous space, you see."
"So why are you here and not back on Earth?" Jennifer Delaney asked him. She did not beat around the bush. Dara normally liked that in a woman, or he thought he would have liked that in a woman if he'd really seen all that many in the past few years, but it was potentially more endearing without firearms involved.
"I was supposed to give you a message,"
Dara said, glad to finally be coming back to this part. He began to reach for his pocket and froze as she scowled.
It's in my pocket."
She relented, so he continued, taking out the folded note. He went to pass it to her, but she shook her head.
"You'll be reading it out loud," she said. "I need to keep pointing my gun at the right place."
"It's quite long."
"Abridge then,"
she told him with a cool smile. Dara swallowed hard, looking down at the letter and glancing over it. He'd read through it, of course, and normally he could have told anyone what it was all about. Right now, he was unable to recall anything about its content whatsoever, and found himself reading it again as if for the first time.
He said. "Well, it's from Dr. Anis Hussein. He's the ambassador of humans to the Dominion, if you didn't know." "I don't care much for politics," she replied. "Keep going."
Well, he hopes you're well," Dara continued, aware he was sounding like an idiot. "He also wants to let you know that humans have FTL now. How about that, right?"
"That won't help inside the barrier," Jennifer replied. "Not unless you've got a wormhole, as my understanding goes."
"Yes, that's the next bit," Dara continued. "He wants you to help with that."
"I think people would notice if we stole a wormhole beacon," Jennifer replied thoughtfully. "That doesn't make it impossible."
No, wait. You could do that?" Dara asked in surprise. Jennifer shrugged.
"We've already stolen a full cruiser."
Dara almost laughed, albeit whether that was from amusement at what was done, or in a kind of horror that they'd actually tried and succeeded in doing it. He wasn't sure. He wasn't sure whether you could even manage something like that. And I actually think he had something else in mind, in the event that you didn't. He says that to help Earth, he needs you to not keep beating the Kelsey quite so badly. That really got her attention.
The Dominion are paying me to do otherwise, she said sharply. If I start acting in bad faith.
I don't think he wants anything like that. But he'd like you to not bring down their ability to fight the Dominion, or at least not yet, Dara explained. It's all right here in the letter. They want you to help get Earth into space. They're offering to make this a colony. And you're the colonial governor.
Governor?
Jennifer laughed.
Me? I'm a pirate. I worked in IT. What do I know about running a colony?
Dara looked around awkwardly. The office was incredibly ornate and well furnished, and from what he'd seen so far, Jennifer's operation was a sizable one. You seem to do well enough with what you've got here.
This is a stolen mansion on a stolen planet, full of stolen ships and other stolen things and people who steal them,
Jennifer told him.
Governor Delaney, I wouldn't know the first damn thing about running a community.
Don't tell me, Dara protested. Dr. Hussein's the one appointing you to the position.
Fucking hell,
she cursed, leaning back, yet this in no way affected her aim. So about that gun, he said, glancing at it. What if I promised I'll behave? She sighed and lowered the gun.
Well, it's not like you'd get far even if you did try anything. And you don't look like the last two guys.
Dara raised his eyebrows at that revelation. The last two guys?
My last two encounters with humans ended on a particularly sour note, she said with a grimace. The most recent was a mass-murdering English psychopath who very nearly had his chance to torture and kill me. The one before that was an Australian psychopath who tried to protect me from the hunters by strangling me unconscious and then going off to wage bloody war on them.
Dara blinked. Are you talking about Adrian Saunders?
Oh, great. Now he's so famous that he's got a statue and a groupie,
Jennifer said bitterly.
There's probably a song about him too by now.
But there's a statue of him on Erbzerk, Dara said confused. They say he saved everybody on the station.
There's a lot more to that story than meets the eye, Jennifer replied. And besides, that statue was supposed to be gone. Some big blue hairy thing took some kind of flamethrower to the thing.
Well, it's back now, Dara told her. Along with the statue of the big blue hairy thing. I think they called it an Umonhei, although I've never heard of it before. Jennifer froze, and Dara had the feeling that he'd said the wrong sort of thing. The way she looked, it seemed like somebody was going to die, and as he was there, and she had a very unpleasant sort of gun, he suspected that it may well be him.
Oh,
she said slowly and with a voice that trembled with anger.
That complete and utter fucking arsehole.
Alright guys, that's going to do it for this one today. I am so sorry about the break. I had to recuperate. I took a whole bunch of cold medicine and basically slept for a day and a half. And then I woke up the next day and I moved what was left of the stuff from our old apartment to the new one. So that was fun. And then I had work today, and work was not bad. So just a lot of signing on stuff and learning about policy and everything like that. So not too bad. But I hope you guys enjoyed this one. There might be kind of a jarring change of accents at the very end there. I don't know. It might sound good. It might sound bad. I'm going to check here when I go through the editing. But thank you guys so much for being here with me today. I appreciate you waiting, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.